today we're running on a very tight schedule, so we will just move along. We have a great list of speakers for everybody. So let me just say welcome to our monthly webinar, this time focusing on real estate tokenization and global regulations. It will be very, very interesting. Our program for today is jam-packed. We will start off with Klaus Skåning talking about the tokenized industry status update and the DigiShares traction. We will then move on to Volodymyr Jensen talking about EU regulations for tokenization. After him, we have Charles Kerrigan talking about regulation in capital raising and tokenization, what it is, why is it, and how do I comply? After that, we have Sinha pooja, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, talking about the regulatory framework, tokenization in Singapore and the rest of Asia, and giving us an overview. Then we have Nicola Marsala from Storm Partners talking about the Swiss framework for real estate tokenization. Coming up thereafter is Alireza Ziadat talking about German regulations for tokenization. So we're really getting an all-around view. We will round up today with two case studies. One is presented by Tad Langesti talking about Gaincoin, and then we have Rodolfo Monsberger talking about Bimont. And finally, we will have a fireside chat and Q&A where everybody's questions will be answered. Because we have such a tight schedule today, I do not believe that after each speaker there will be time for individual Q&As. So most likely, most questions will be held for the panel at the end. This will also still be great because, of course, all of our panelists will be able to get into discussions, and that's often very, very interesting, especially when they disagree. So stay tuned for that. We will also encourage all of our panelists to go down into the Q&A section and answer questions there directly. So if you have a question for one of our speakers, you can put it down in the Q&A. And what you should do is write the speaker's name first, followed by your question, because otherwise it might be a little bit difficult to know what question is for which speaker. So always the name of the speaker first, followed by your question. And if you don't do that, we will assume that it is just an open question that we can put to the floor in the Q&A. Yes, and also feel free to use the chat, but for specific questions for the speakers, use the Q&A, because otherwise it might be a little bit more difficult, but feel free to use the chat. With that said, I think we should just jump into it, and I will invite to the stage Klaus Skåning. Klaus, can you take the screen, please?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
You're very
I will
welcome.
also keep my part really short because we have a tight schedule. My name is Klaus. I'm the CEO of DigiShares, and of course, as we are a company that provides a white label platform for tokenization, primarily of real estate, but also other types of assets. Today, we are focused on regulation. Regulation is extremely important for tokenization. It has been a bottleneck in many places, but it's opening up more and more. And as hopefully we'll hear from the speakers today, it's becoming easier and easier to do tokenization in many different parts of the world. We don't do any project without a legal partner. It's absolutely necessary to have a legal partner for a tokenization project in order to stay fully compliant. And we constantly monitor also the regulatory updates around the world to find out where it's possible to tokenize or where it's maybe less possible to tokenize and what the typical challenges are. So today, we are very proud to have our own legal counsel presenting his industry report on EU regulations, and also very proud to have some of our most important legal partners on the webinar today speaking about regulation and tokenization from their viewpoint in their region of the world. And we are also very proud to have two of our most exciting white label partners presenting their projects, Gain and Bimont, at the end. And they're really looking forward to it. In February the 14th, I think, we have the next webinar focused on tokenization and end-to-end consultancy. So Some consultancy companies in the space of tokenization will present how they work and how they can assist companies that are looking to try out tokenization as a kind of pilot. On our side, DigiShares side, very briefly, we have had good traction recently. We signed up 10 clients since the last webinar in many different countries, both the UK, the US, Poland, Canada, Sweden, and one in the UAE. 9 out of 10 were real estate related, so we still see most of the traction in this space coming from real estate. But there's also interest from renewables and energy and other types of assets. 2021 was a really good year for DigiShares. We grew with a factor 10 on many parameters, including revenue, number of clients, newsletter subscribers, and so forth. So yeah, so really good year for us. And I think I will conclude here and not waste more time on my update, and give back the word to Mette to present the first speaker. Thank you and welcome today.
All right. Thank you, Klaus. See you at the panel. So next up, we have Vladimir Jensen, a legal consultant at DigiShares, talking about EU regulation and tokenization. Hello, Vladimir.
Hey, can I share the screen?
Yes, please take the stage.
All right. Thank you, Mette. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Vladimir Jensen. I'm the legal counsel at DigiShares, and I will be speaking to you generally about EU regulations for tokenization, specifically the financial regulations. And so, yeah. So let's just jump straight into it. The EU has been rather active in this field in recent years. And first of all, it has decided to create 2 separate regulatory frameworks. One for crypto assets that do not qualify as financial instruments, which will now be regulated by the bespoke markets in crypto assets regulation, which essentially sets out to create a comprehensive, harmonized regime for the regulation of crypto assets and crypto asset service providers across the EU. And the second regime for crypto assets that do qualify as financial instruments and are regulated under traditional securities laws. And so, although MiCA is a 100-page proposal, I attempted to summarize some of its main points in the table on the left side of the screen. And it is important to remember that it is a proposal that is undergoing EU legislative procedures, meaning that the final text will be likely quite different, especially considering the fact that already thousands of amendments to the text have been proposed. But in my opinion, the core of the regulation will remain the same, and that is, of course, the object of the regulation and the basic classification of tokens that MiCA offers. So MiCA regulates crypto assets, and crypto assets are defined as a digital representation of value or rights that can be transferred and stored using DLT, distributed ledger technology, or similar technology. And so this is really a catch-all, all-encompassing definition that effectively applies to any digital representation of value or rights on the blockchain. Equally as broad is the definition of crypto asset service providers, which reads as any person whose occupation or business is the provision of crypto asset services to third parties on a professional basis. And so at the core of MiCA is this classification of 3 specific token categories. So there's a general catch-all category of crypto assets and 3 specific ones, which are e-money tokens, asset reference tokens, and utility tokens. And e-money tokens essentially serve as means of exchange and aim to maintain value by reference to a fiat currency that is legal tender. So such stablecoins as USDC, USD Tether are likely to qualify as e-money tokens. Here you can see also that there's a distinction between significant EMTs and EMTs. Essentially, certain EMTs can qualify as significant if they are big enough, if they fulfill certain criteria, and are considered to be systemic within the Union by the European Banking Authority. The same is the case for ARTs, asset reference tokens, which are similar to EMTs in the way that they also aim to maintain stable value, but by reference to several fiat currencies or commodities or other crypto assets or combinations thereof. So the difference really is that EMT references one fiat currency, while asset reference tokens can reference a lot of different assets. And then we have the utility tokens, which essentially provide electronic access to digital goods or services available on the DLT and are only acceptable with the issuer. This last part is a rather important caveat that probably would disqualify quite a few perceived utility tokens from being considered utility. But so each of these categories, of course, has its own requirements and obligations, but I will not be going into it so much, but I would rather move to the right-hand side of the screen where we have traditional financial regulations and we have the security tokens, which are financial instruments such as equity, debt, derivatives, and so on, but in tokenized form. And when we talk about security tokens and in EU law, from the perspective of EU financial law, we are most often and most likely will be dealing with a specific kind of security, which is a transferable security. And for an instrument to qualify as a transferable security, it needs to fulfill certain criteria, which is transferability. So it needs to be capable of being transferred between participants, negotiability. So it needs to be suitable for capital market modes of buying and selling, standardization, which essentially refers to fungibility of the instrument. And it also should perform similar functions to established categories of securities, such as shares, bonds, derivatives, and so on. And then we have legislation that governs the capital markets in terms of primary and secondary market. This is by far not all the legislation. This is just some of the important pieces. And so in the primary market, what we have seen in recent years is that tokenized offerings have been booming. And this is partially due to an adequate regulatory framework that doesn't prohibit the use of security token offerings and is suitable for them. And so the primary piece of legislation here is prospectus regulation, and then we have the newly issued crowdfunding regulation that came into force on the 10th of November 2021, which, in my opinion, is going to gain more relevance in 2022. And then we have secondary markets where the situation is slightly different because there are a lot more obstacles to the use of blockchain, decentralized finance models, and security tokens themselves in secondary markets, which is primarily due to the involvement of multiplicity of financial intermediaries and specific requirements to how transactions in securities are supposed to happen, when they're supposed to happen, and who can be involved in them. And we will talk a little bit more about it in just a minute. And so the EU has proposed two important amendments in this field. The first is the amendment to the definition of financial instruments, which will now read as including such instruments issued by means of distributed ledger technology. This is, of course, a basic first step in adopting capital markets legislation to digital assets, but it is important because it creates legal certainty with regards to classification of such instruments, and also has a harmonizing effect on the financial regulators of the member states, as now they have a more unified approach in classifying these instruments and applying the appropriate regulatory framework. And the second proposal is the EU-wide pilot regime for DLT market infrastructures, which I will outline in the end. And so the primary market for security token offerings, of course, there's a lot of EU legislation that is potentially applicable here, but I will focus on EU prospectus regulation, which is the primary piece here, and it regulates offers of securities to the public, essentially meaning any communication in any form setting out the terms of a transaction to purchase securities, which is addressed to the public as a whole, would require an approved prospectus with the financial authority. And the advantage of EU as a jurisdiction in this case is that prospectus regulation establishes a harmonized regime and an effective and efficient passporting mechanism. So once a prospectus is approved with one financial authority of a member state, it can be passported out to potentially cover the whole EU through a notification procedure. And there are also some important exceptions to the requirement to publish a prospectus, which may be relevant to some issuers. And some of these most used exceptions are offers which are only addressed to qualified investors, or offers addressed to 150 persons per member state, and these persons can be retail clients, and you can combine it with qualified investors exception, but you need to be careful because there could be additional national requirements applicable if the ticket size is 100,000 euros, or if the total size of the offering is within the threshold, which can be from 1 to 8 million, depending on what the member state has decided, as they have discretion to determine the threshold. And if you do conduct such type of an offering, then you do not benefit from the harmonization offered under EU law, and you would have to pay attention to the securities laws of individual member states in that case to comply with the thresholds and any additional formal requirements. I can see that I'm rapidly running out of time, so I'll be very brief about EU crowdfunding regulation, which essentially regulates EU crowdfunding service providers for both crowdfunding and crowd lending, so both equity and loans, which can be tokenized equity and tokenized loans. So this can be very interesting for issuers of security tokens and also businesses looking to establish these sorts of platforms. There's a passporting mechanism, so a crowdfunding service provider can cover the whole European area. And there's also a little difference with the regime under prospectus regulation, is that the crowdfunding offers of up to 5 million can be conducted without a prospectus. And this is harmonized across the EU. And so the secondary markets, as I mentioned, this is where most hurdles for security tokens, blockchain, and DeFi are on the legal side of things, in the EU at least. And essentially, in the current regulatory framework, clearing, settlement, safekeeping, and recording of transactions in security tokens that are traded on regulated venues is governed by the requirements of Central Securities Depository Regulations and Settlement Finality Directive. There are also other legislation that is applicable, but these are some of the more problematic ones. And so some of the implications, which I found not exhaustive, I just picked some of them. For instance, they require system operator, meaning that any truly decentralized blockchain system cannot be used as the basis for a trading platform, as there needs to be a legal entity that is operating a security settlement system. Only authorized participants can access security settlement and delivery systems. And so traditionally, blockchain would allow the participation of a wide range of participants, including natural persons in settlement of transactions, if we are speaking about DeFi, and peer-to-peer transactions that can also be conducted with security tokens. However, this particular requirement precludes the use of such a model in regulated venues. And then we have the requirement for security tokens to be recorded in book entry form by the Central Securities Depositories, essentially meaning that this financial intermediary is interposed in the transactions with security tokens and safekeeps the security tokens and records them in particular way. So the point is here that the current regulatory framework, which is based on these legacy capital market infrastructures with a multiplicity of financial intermediaries that oftentimes perform singular isolated functions within the securities transactions, is not suited to unleash the true potential of blockchain technology and all the benefits offered by security tokens, as blockchain can merge certain activities in the pre and post trade processes. So blockchain transactions can have automatic and almost instantaneous settlement and clearing done in principle, requiring no central securities depositories or clearing houses. And so there is a loss of efficiency in secondary markets that the EU has recognized, and in response to this has issued an EU pilot regime for DLT market infrastructures, which essentially is a regulatory sandbox to test blockchain technology in trading, clearing, and settlement of securities. So some of these requirements that I have mentioned are waived in this pilot regime, and it applies to both shares and bonds. There are certain qualification requirements with regards to volume, and somewhat unfortunately, only licensed financial institutions can participate in it. But nonetheless, it is an important development, which in the end will become the basis for an overhaul, hopefully overhaul and reform of the secondary market legislation in the EU. I can see that I am over time. So I thank you for your patience and for your attention. And if you would like to read more about security token regulation in the EU, you're more than welcome to scan this QR code and find our industry report or navigate to digishares.io. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Vladimir. That was very extensive. I have seen in the chat that there are quite a few questions about the EU and regulations, and there should be some links provided to the report. And also there were, of course, already questions on whether or not this will be recorded so that people might be able to review it. And it will be sent out to everybody. So thank you very much. And everybody, if you have any questions for Vladimir, you can use the Q&A he will be in there and able to answer, and we will also move the really good questions along to the panel. So if you ask something that we think is relevant for everybody, it will be taken up and discussed in the panel session. So I think with that, we should just move on to the next speaker. And we have Tyler J. Hardraft, partner, Bull Blockchain Law, LLP, speaking about US regulation and tokenization. Tyler, are you there?
Yes, good morning. Hi, how are you?
Fantastic, thank you, and good morning to you too. So you ready to present?
Absolutely, I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes.
And while I do that, I just want to thank you, Klaus, and the whole DigiShares team for having me to speak on this topic today. I think there's a lot of tokenization going on, so it's great to participate in this education and talk about what we've been seeing in the space. So with that, I'll jump into it. Just a quick background on myself. I'm Tyler Hartraft. I'm a partner at Bull Blockchain Law, LLP. We are a Philadelphia-based law firm that specializes in focusing with clients on blockchain projects, tokenization, and fintech compliance. So we'll be speaking about mainly our experience in the digital securities industry, especially with respect to tokenization of real estate. We've been fortunate enough to participate in over $300 million in digital securities offerings over the past 3-4 years. We've also worked with the EU to discuss and study really the developing regulatory frameworks around blockchain and smart contracts in the US. And we've also worked with all different parties in the digital securities offering process, from issuers to platforms to investors. So I'm hoping I can translate some of the holistic concepts that we've come across in our involvement over the past 3 years. So with that said, we're going to dive into the overview, which is what is real estate tokenization, why it may be a good idea to tokenize real estate, and some practical and regulatory considerations, which are really the most important, I think, when discussing real estate tokenization, and whether tokenization is a good route for you as an issuer. So just to get a bare bones assessment, a tokenized security really just refers to a technology overlay for a traditional type of security. So that could be an equity interest, that could be a bond, and the equity interest could take different shapes and forms. It doesn't have to be exclusively a corporate share. It can be a limited partnership interest. It can be a limited liability company interest. It could also be a profits interest. And so we've seen all types of digital securities being tokenized or digitized. And so it's a really expansive opportunity for private securities in general. And as far as the tangible assets that can be represented by digital securities, there's no limit there as well, really, because just like a corporate share or a limited partnership interest can really represent an ownership interest in any type of asset, the technology overlay of tokenizing that share or that debt instrument really has no limits there either. And the most important part really is this enhanced benefit of blockchain technology and smart contract technology. And we'll get into what are the specific benefits of tokenization for issuers and for their investors later on in this presentation. So a lot of questions that people come to us first with when they're considering conducting a token offering is really with respect to regulatory requirements. And we always note at the outset that it's important to understand that this is really just a technology overlay, and it doesn't change the compliance requirements that you as an issuer must abide by. So you're still going to be issuing this token, this digital security, in compliance with securities laws based in the US. If you're based in the US and you're offering to US investors, or you're based outside the US and you're offering to US investors, there's a discrete group of regulations that you will have to comply with as a securities issuer, and also possibly as if you have a fund structure. There's all additional compliance requirements under the Investment Company Act and Investment Advisors Act. So one of the key benefits to tokenizing digital assets, or tokenizing real estate, is you can allow investors to record ownership on a blockchain network. And so this really increases transparency. It makes ease of regulatory compliance a lot easier. And so there's a lot of benefits to be had in the realm of tokenization of real estate. And we're going to continue to explore those. So a lot of questions from issuers at the outset, or prospective issuers, are, what are the benefits to tokenization, and is it something that is right for my project? And there's a lot of nuance to that question that might be particular to an investment or a specific issuer that we deal with our clients or prospective clients when we're advising on whether tokenization is the right route. But there's also some general considerations as well. So a reduction of costs is really a big piece of this. If you take the token and conduct your initial issuance and then get that token listed on a secondary market, those transactions among your investors and prospective new purchasers become a lot simpler to effect, because you no longer have to piecemeal deal with all of these resales as the issuer, which is really tied into the simplifying due diligence and communications aspect of digital securities. So with secondary trading, there's a lot of pre-trade disclosures, there's documents that need to be signed. All of this needs to get coordinated by the issuer, the buyer, and the seller. But this can all be done prior to listing on a secondary platform, and it makes the whole process a lot easier, and you can handle it in bulk as the issuer at the outset. One thing we've learned actually from some of our real estate issuers, some of our general partners, is that it gives them a lot of freedom with respect to managing their assets. So principals can manage the lifespan of their real estate assets much more easily when they're not under pressure to provide liquidity to their investors. So you could imagine a situation where a principal has a really high value asset that is performing very well in the later stages of the investment. And maybe the investment strategy was to sell that asset 4 years out so that all of the LPs can now have liquidity and move on to a new investment. Well, if that asset, it takes a lot to get an asset that is that mature and generating good cash flow. And so for a general partner to be able to alter that investment strategy and hold on to that asset could be great for a lot of investors, while still offering the opportunity for other investors to have liquidity in a secondary market. So some other practical considerations for why to tokenize real estate is really the whole admin process becomes a lot simpler. So when you conduct an offering, you have to conduct know your customer checks and anti-money laundering. You have to implement an anti-money laundering policy where you're checking against terrorist watch lists for investors. So that becomes an automated process. You also have to check the accreditation status of investors. So if your offering is only geared towards accredited investors, you actually have to follow up and make sure you obtain proof of that accreditation. You can also manage your investor reports and your cap table digitally, so that becomes a streamlined process. And then a really crucial piece of this is that you can pretty much guarantee that you are in compliance with the securities laws when you issue your token and when you allow it to be resold. And that's because the technology allows for baking in compliance requirements into the token so that it cannot be traded to anyone who hasn't passed accreditation or who has not been verified according to your know your customer checks. And so that's a really key piece that gives a lot of certainty and comfort to issuers. And finally, permitting secondary trading, just the availability of liquidity for assets that are traditionally illiquid is a huge opportunity, not only for real estate, but for private securities in general. So we'll dive into some of the practical and regulatory considerations. And I'm not gonna go through every single thing on the slide. I'll kind of just touch on the highlights that are the most important because it can get kind of dense pretty quickly when talking about these regulations. But the first thing that we deal with when dealing with an issuer that's conducting an initial offering of securities, so we have a new real estate project that comes to us and wants to offer securities to investors, is what exemption under the securities laws will be used. Because the rule is that you have to register your offering, so that's generally an IPO, unless an exemption applies. The most common exemption is Rule 506C of Regulation D, which offers an exemption as long as the issuer only sells the investment to accredited investors. The benefit of that exemption is that it can be used to advertise the offering, which most offer issuers prefer to do unless they have a pipeline of investors already signed up to participate, or they'll be working with a broker dealer and do not need any advertising. The other options, Rule 506B, Regulation A, and Reg CF, all kind of have some limitations that don't make them ideal for tokenization. They can be used, but generally 506B you cannot advertise, so a lot of issuers opt not to go for that exemption. Regulation A requires SEC approval, and so that can be quite a burdensome and lengthy process to go through with the SEC. And then Regulation CF, there's a $5 million limit, so that limit generally is not ideal for lots of issuers. Although for smaller raises, it can be ideal, especially a series of raises for different properties. There's investor limitations to prevent to public reporting requirements. So a private company may become subject to SEC reporting obligations inadvertently, depending on its assets. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide with the Investment Company Act. There's also anti-fraud provisions when you offer securities in the US. So you want to make sure that you develop offering memorandum and offering documents in general that disclose all the necessary information about your issuance and about your business. And that's a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis with our clients. So the Investment Company Act is probably there's really three pillars: the Securities Act, the Investment Company Act, and the Investment Advisors Act. So the Investment Company Act is really a crucial law to understand for issuers because it regulates investment companies that are defined as investment companies. And so a real estate investment fund can fall within that category if the issuer is not careful about how it's allocating funds to different assets. There's generally two private fund exemptions. So if you are investing in securities, you want to fall within one of these exemptions to ensure that you don't have to register with the SEC, which is a long and burdensome process. And there are ongoing reporting requirements that can be quite burdensome. And so the most commonly used exemptions are 3C1 and 3C7. 3C1 limits the number of investors, and 3C7 limits the nature of investors. Outside of that, there is an exemption for funds that are investing directly in real estate or real estate type interests. And so that is the exemption commonly relied on by most real estate fund managers. So the key considerations are, will the issuer be acquiring real property or directly or indirectly through a wholly owned SPV? And will the issuer be acquiring assets other than real estate? So the third pillar is really this Investment Advisors Act of 1940, which goes hand in hand with the Investment Company Act. And this act generally states that if you are managing investments of securities, then you will have to register as an investment manager either with the SEC or with the state in which you're operating. Again, this only applies in the event that you are managing securities. And so real estate interests, fee simple interests in real estate do not constitute securities. There is some analysis that needs to be done for some alternative type real estate investments. So you want to be careful about, if you're not investing directly in real estate or through an SPV, you want to be careful about the type of assets that you're managing and to ensure that you do comply with this act. So when that's really the three pillars of those are the three pillars of regulations that we deal with in the initial offerings. With respect to secondary sales, there's some additional rules. So a lot of our prospective clients come to us and they ask, how does this whole secondary trading thing work? And what we tell them is it's a great opportunity to allow your investors liquidity, but there are some considerations at the outset that we should talk about, such as the publicly traded partnership rules and whether there is an exemption available. So the publicly traded partnership rule is a rule that states the partnership will not have the benefits of pass-through taxation if the issuer is considered a publicly traded partnership, which is really a huge penalty. If you're a real estate principal and you're used to providing returns that are really thank you, really mostly due to pass-through taxation, corporate tax on those returns would really do a lot of damage. And so we look at the qualifying income exemption and we look to see if the assets that will be held by the funds will qualify for pass-through taxation and not be subject to corporate tax. And so I'll conclude with this last slide, just stepping back and giving a whole overview of the life cycle of a tokenized security offering or a digital offering. So what we handle is entity formation and tax advising, and that's usually the first 2 weeks of your initial engagement. We also handle due diligence and document preparation in coordination with your token issuer, such as DigiShares. And then it's all about, after that, maybe 4 to 6 week process is over, it's all about bringing you to the market offering, which can last 3 to 12 months. I think most issuers really aim to achieve a 3-month offering and fill that offering so they can get to investing. And then it's an immediate process to receive your funding and issue the securities.
Very nice. Very nice. Unfortunately, you're out of time. I can see that there are a few questions for Tyler and they're being asked in the chat. So can I ask people to please put your questions for a specific speaker in the Q&A, because there are so many notes in the chat now that otherwise they might just be lost. I'm hoping that you, Tyler, have time to go into the Q&A and maybe answer a few questions. And for the really good ones, we'll bring them up at the panel. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Happy to. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. So next up, we have Charles Kerrigan, partner at CMS, talking about regulation in capital raising and tokenization. What is it? Why is it? And how do I comply? Charles, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Fantastic.
Bring up my slides.
Yes,
So,
please take the stage.
Right. So following Tyler, you'll hear many of the same themes. And Volodymyr has spoken about European regulations and Tyler about US regulations. As you'd expect, these map across different jurisdictions. So I'm going to cover similar topics from a UK perspective. We have, by and large, the same market risk and consumer protection rules applying. So this will start to seem familiar as you go through the various speakers. And to introduce myself, I'm a crypto asset lawyer, and I've invested in a number of real estate tokenization projects at very early stage. So I've got 2 interests for the purposes of today. I start with an introduction of my explanation of where the value is in this. So when we're talking about tokenization, I think more broadly than that, we're talking about digitalization. So tokenization, as the other speakers are saying, is not a free pass around regulation. The regulation that applies outside tokenization to securities issues applies inside tokenization as well. This is applying some technology to improve the customer experience. So it's about digital transformation in the broader sense. Further out from that, it enables automation and all the benefits that we hear about coming from speed, cost, efficiency savings in that area, and also improved user experience. So from my helicopter view of tokenization, I think that we're always looking at the points that Jeff Bezos has been making for 20 years. How do you make this easier for customers to choose you and for customers to transact with you? Through the next few slides, I just make a few points around the English company law requirements, funds and financial law requirements in the UK, and then we'll round up with a conclusion. So the first thing is to say, in the UK, we have distinctions between types of tokens similar to those distinctions in the EU. And I set out here how the UK definitions are very similar to the definitions that apply in the EU. So the key distinction here is between utility tokens, by and large, outside the regulatory perimeter, and security tokens, by and large, inside the regulatory perimeter. Something that is asset-backed and has the characteristics of equity or debt will be a security token. So it will be inside the regulatory perimeter, and that's why all of the speakers today will run through how our regulatory rules apply to that. A lot of the crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, are utility tokens, and that's why they don't attract the same rules. That may be something which changes. In the UK, most recently, we've had a change to bring utility tokens within the financial promotions rule. So we're starting to see financial regulation creep into the utility token side of the market. So we see the regulatory perimeter expanding rather than contracting. My definition of what we're talking about here, so we're by and large using blockchains. These are databases that are shared between parties. So if you're doing a multi-party transaction,
Charles, are we supposed to be able to see some slides right now?
I thought I'd shared my screen.
Apparently
Oh,
you
apologies.
did not.
Okay.
I thought maybe you just changed your mind, but then there were questions
No,
in
I
the
didn't.
chat. Where are the slides? Okay, they're coming now.
They've arrived. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Apologies. This is what you missed before. That would have made more sense if it was showing. And then moving on to the slide that I was on here around tokenization and blockchain. So tokenization is the adding of assets to a blockchain. And my life cycle for the project looks at beginning with the asset, enables the verification of ownership, digital representation on the platform, bringing on investors, and that takes you to this point around issuance of securities and secondary market trading. So everybody speaking today is looking at this same track, beginning at an asset on one side and reaching through to the other side, where we've got the ability to have liquidity in private markets. Next slide. So the key point here is, when we talk about tokenization of real estate, in practice, we're generally talking about tokenization of the equity or ownership interests in a corporate vehicle. It is possible in the UK to tokenize real estate directly, but you don't get the benefit of blockchain. So blockchain enables you to manage decentralized databases. By definition, the real estate database for the UK is operated by a statutory body, the UK Land Registry. So whatever functionality you bring to a blockchain database, you ultimately have the register of record with the statutory authority. So we're generally in practice seeing tokenization of interests in the vehicles. And the list of vehicles there are the ones that we've seen in practice being used. So they are the conventional list of investing vehicles for real estate. And of course, check your tax. I think we'll all say the same thing on that. This next slide is just to give an indication of where the background legislation is in the UK. So we are not one of the jurisdictions that has currently updated our Companies Act rules to take account of digitalization of securities. And that has implications, as you see I set out on the slide. In other words, it's not possible to directly tokenize because, again, we have the companies legislation telling us that there is a register, which is the authorized register set out by the legislation, which is the register of members. So what do? This is a pretty conventional solution for lots of UK real estate transactions by using a nominee company and the fact that under English law, it's possible to split the legal title to an asset from the beneficial title to an asset, i.e. the economic rights to an asset. We're able to put the legal title in the company's register of members. So that will record a nominee as the owner of all of the equity, and then the equitable, the beneficial, the economic interests are traded on a blockchain supported platform, similar to the screen-based trading that we see in traditional financial markets. So we're borrowing a workaround here for the moment. So our transactions currently look like this, but our policymakers are in consultation at the moment to work through these administrative changes. So the point here is, as well as there being quite fundamental—
1 minute left.
Thank you. As well as being quite fundamental issues that we have to run through here, there's a lot of administration that sits behind it. Other issues, again, the administration, the requirement for things to be in writing, and the rules relating to electronic signatures. So in each of these transactions, we're checking the administration that sits behind the transactions. We've worked on the tokenization of funds. It's an obvious use case because it's a very large market and it faces retail investors. Security tokens are specified investments for these purposes, and therefore, as I touched on before, they are inside the regulatory perimeter. There are legal requirements to comply with as a consequence of that. And so we go. The offer of securities to the public brings us into the prospectus requirements, as Vladimir has already explained. We have exemptions in the UK as well. And so in each of these transactions, we're working down our workflow and checklists to see what the most suitable transaction structure is for that deal. And then finally, the kind of why, what, how, and where. This is technology that sits alongside regulation. So what we're looking at here is improved user experience and improved access to market. One of the most common conversations in the UK market is how the current funds that access retail funding for real estate are going to be disrupted by new types of entity, whether that's platforms that already exist or new platforms that will come to join them. But I think the largest commercial topic in the UK market is we've got a historic market with lots of famous names in it. Who is going to join that market as from outside the incumbents and bring better user experience, better customer service using tokenization? And that's me.
All right, thank you very much. That was very good. I think there might be some questions for you, and everybody please feel free to ask questions for Charles in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Charles. And next up on the program, we have who's here? We have Pooja. Are you there?
Yes, hi there.
Fantastic. Oh, we are seeing your email right now. You are sharing your screen, you are aware?
I haven't started sharing my screen yet. I think that's Charles's screen.
Is that Charles's screen? Charles, you have to unshare your screen.
Sorry, apologies. I thought I'd taken my emails off, but I hadn't handed over the sharing.
Okay, hope there was nothing confidential there. All right, so now we will be hearing about a regulatory framework, tokenization in Singapore and the rest of Asia. Please take the stage.
Hi there. So I was just trying to share my screen. I don't seem to have the controls to do
Is
that.
it still Charles's screen we are seeing?
I think so.
Okay, Ashley, please jump in here.
Okay. Should I just start nonetheless? I know we're short of time.
Yes, please do. We'll give you an extra minute in the end.
Okay, I think it is working. Okay, this should work. Right, so hi everybody. Thanks very much to the DigiShares team for this opportunity. My name is Pooja Sinha. I'm based in Singapore. I'm an international lawyer who does both traditional and new age advisory, and I'm a partner in a Singapore law firm. So I've got a rather challenging task, which is to give you an overview of regulations covering a humongous continent. So I'm going to restrict myself to just giving you a bit of a flavor of what the issues are. Obviously, any deal that has to be done, the analysis is quite fact specific, particularly because in Asia, we tend to see a lot of cross-border deals with the Singapore or Hong Kong or one of the other more sort of mature jurisdictions being sort of the hub for the issuance. And that presents certain challenges in itself. So with that, let me just dive in. I won't go into the benefits of tokenization. Luckily, my fellow speakers have already covered that. I think, what are some of the issues that one has to look at? I think in a very similar vein to what applies in the US and Europe and in the UK, I think they fall into certain very common buckets. Of course, you need to consider the application of securities laws when you're issuing a token. And that goes to the investor status. I think what makes an offering in Asia a bit more challenging, of course, is that the definition of accredited investor varies in different countries. I mean, stating the obvious, but we don't have the benefit of passporting rules, unlike the EU, which would have made life for us lawyers much more easy. Separate from that, of course, I think similar to elsewhere in the world, we do have private placement exemptions, which depend on the size of the offering or the number of investors in certain cases. I think one point that is often missed is that above and beyond that, there's also restrictions around the form of marketing that you need to be careful about. Otherwise, you could very easily inadvertently cross the line from being not a public offer, but not a private offer, but a public offer, which of course then requires the full bells and whistles of an IPO type registration process. Just leaving aside securities law for a second, I would say, Asia has a bit of a complicated relationship with property. I think, if you've seen Crazy Rich Asians, you will know that property is obviously big in Asia, but I think just because of various historical factors, there has been a lot of government protectionism around property in terms of disallowing or restricting foreign investment in certain situations. It's also been around additional consumer protection, and that I think makes doing a real estate deal of any kind sometimes a bit difficult in a cross-border context, because it's not just about complying with the letter of the law, but also with the spirit of the law. Another consideration to be mindful of is just, in certain countries in Asia, I'm just pulling out some examples. India is an example. There's been a somewhat anti-crypto sentiment among the regulators, and although security tokens, of course, are not by themselves necessarily associated with cryptocurrency, I think sometimes they do get caught in a bit of that regulatory noise. So you do have to be careful about how you present the offering. And I think perhaps, DigiShares has the perfect solution in that, you shouldn't call it a token, you should call it a DigiShare, which is just one of those sort of management issues that might help keep you out of the regulatory eye to some extent. Then what are the other regulations to think about? I think, again, this is sort of similar to if you're conducting an activity which is similar to what is basically a broker-dealer type activity, as it's known in the US, you're kind of actively intermediating a securities law transaction, then you do need to be generally licensed in that relevant jurisdiction. What I have up there on the screen is, some of the categories, some of the specific categories from a Singapore law perspective. And if you conduct any of these activities, then you need what's known as the capital markets service license. And that just requires going through a whole regulatory process with the financial services regulator. Not sort of, the end of the world in itself, but it does require, I think, at least bedding down for like a 6-month process or thereabouts. And it does require, putting in the time and the capital to have policies, procedures, and people in place, because those are what, the Singapore regulator, like other financial services regulators cares about. I think in Singapore in particular, there's a huge emphasis on having your AML and KYC and compliance protocols up to the regulatory standards, and there's very frequent checks on compliance with those standards as well. So again, it can of course be done, has been done many times over, but it's just about being prepared for that screening process. Moving on from that, we all know how important it is to have secondary market liquidity for tokens. So again, if you're effectively operating a mini stock exchange for tokens, you do need a separate category of license. Again, for those from the US who are listening, this is kind of a version of the ATS license or ATS registration in the US. So both in Singapore and in Hong Kong, as an example, there's a whole separate category of license that you need if you're doing this activity. In Singapore, this license, the RMO license, has actually now been granted in a few cases as well. And again, it just involves sort of jumping through various financial services compliance hoops to the regulator's satisfaction. Then moving on to talk about funds. So I think this is where it becomes quite interesting. Obviously, investing in real estate as an individual is in itself not a regulated activity, but when you sort of package it so as to bring in third-party capital, so as to kind of conduct active management of real estate assets, or a combination of the two, I think that's when you really kind of begin to cross the line into running a full-blown collective investment scheme, as it's called, and therefore attract fund management licensing obligations. So again, that involves in Singapore and Hong Kong, as an example, kind of interfacing with the with the financial services regulators to get that particular license. And there are different categories of licenses depending on the capital that you're investing in, depending on the number of investors, and so on and so forth. So again, you just kind of need to figure out what applies to you depending on the specifics of what the underlying investment is. In some cases, I think similar to the US, you do have certain exemptions from real estate. But again, you have to kind of work through the nuances, because you might get those exemptions from a fund management license, but sometimes if you're not a regulated entity, then you don't get certain tax exemptions, which again are fairly important. There's also sort of reputational and optical reasons why, even in the real estate space, a lot of investors prefer their managers to be licensed. So that's when you kind of have to embrace regulation. And we often see that happening, even though you technically may not need to. And so in fact, this is what we get many inquiries from Singapore-based property companies in particular, on kind of navigating the license process for the reasons that I mentioned. Then, just moving on to, one of the final issues that I wanted to talk about, and again,
1 minute left.
Perfect timing, is, the kind of issues you have to keep in mind in a cross-border context. So in a typical structure in Singapore or Hong Kong, you have the capital raising vehicle, the issuing entity based in Singapore, Hong Kong, just because the stability of the legal regime, a lot of tax incentives and benefits as well. But then you have the actual operating company, or in the case of real estate, the asset owning vehicle based elsewhere. So, India, Indonesia, as an example. And then you have to do a lot of old world structuring to make sure that, you can move money between the two jurisdictions in a way that complies with regulations, in a way that complies with tax requirements as well. So, for example, Singapore, Indonesia is again a corridor that's very interesting. Singapore is often used by Indonesian companies because there's a double tax treaty between Singapore and Indonesia. And obviously investors have a lot more comfort investing into a Singapore entity as opposed to navigating the ins and outs of the Indonesian legal regime. But again, there's some structuring that has to be done, because in some cases, foreign investments, in certain industries, foreign investment isn't actually allowed in Indonesia. So there's, some slicing and dicing that has to be done in terms of structuring around that. So I think that's all that I had to share for today. And back to you, Mette.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you made it through all of your slides. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and for anybody else who has more questions for Pooja, you can ask them down in the Q&A and she might be able to answer them there. She will also be on the panel, I believe. So good questions can also go to the panel. So feel free to use the Q&A. We will rapidly move on. Next up is Nicola Marcella, partner at Storm Partners. And Nicola will be talking about the Swiss framework for real estate tokenization. Are you there, Nicola?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Fantastic. Please take the stage.
Thank you. So I don't have slides, but I did in the past basically a paper on real estate tokenization in Switzerland. So I would like to share my screen just to go a bit more quickly than reading it through it.
That sounds good.
Let me share the screen. Okay, here we go. So I won't spend much time regarding the Swiss context, the Swiss regulatory context around crypto assets. This is a, let's say, long topic. As you may know, Switzerland has been one of the first countries to issue some regulatory guidance concerning token offerings, and therefore FINMA, the Swiss Financial Authority, as definitions of payment tokens, utility tokens, and asset tokens. And as you may see, I will not spend much time on it because simply, in my opinion, tokenized real estate falls 100% for sure in the category of asset tokens. But even more, Switzerland actually recently, meaning that the law is from 2020, but it entered into force only last year, enacted a proper law. It's called the DLT law. It didn't create a special legal framework for DLT in Switzerland, but it did amended the various provisions, even in the Swiss Civil Code, in order basically to update Swiss regulations in order to basically include distributed ledger technologies in the current legal framework. And it created basically the category of tokenized securities, or as they call them, ledger-based securities, that are defined in the Swiss Code of Obligations, which is part of the Swiss Civil Code. So basically, in Switzerland, we have a proper definition of security tokens in the Civil Code. And when we are talking about real estate tokenization, we do talk about the fact that real estate assets can be represented through these ledger-based securities. I will not annoy you with the definitions. We can go directly through the basically various approaches that you may want to use in Switzerland to tokenize real estate assets. So although we have this possibility of representing securities in the form of tokens, so basically security tokens in Switzerland, you cannot represent directly an asset, in particular a real estate asset, as a token. So you need basically an intermediary, let's say. So first possibility is to tokenize real estate assets through an SPV. That's actually really straightforward. You allocate the real estate assets inside the SPV, and then you decide that the SPV's shares will be represented by security tokens. This is done directly in the articles of association of the SPV, in which you can provide for the fact that the SPV shares will exist in the form of ledger-based securities as per Article 973D of the Swiss Code of Obligations. Of course, this is, let's say, an easy way to tokenize real estate, but it presents some difficulties. Why? Because you may fall within the scope of collective investment regulation here in Switzerland. In particular, of course, Switzerland regulates real estate investment funds, and Swiss authorities, they don't like people to circumvent these regulations simply by incorporating SPV that in the end perform the same economic function of real estate funds. So basically, this SPV for tokenized real estate is usable only for what in Switzerland we call club deals, meaning that if you then offer the shares of this SPV to not even offer. If you have basically less than 20 shareholders, then you can do it because you fall within an exception from the applicability of the Collective Investment Scheme Act. Otherwise, you may basically trigger the applicability of the Collective Investment Scheme Act, and then instead of incorporating a simple SPV, you will need to go through all the regulatory framework applicable to real estate funds, and therefore require FINMA an authorization to launch a proper tokenized real estate fund, which is theoretically possible, although has been not done so far. Then another way, and here of course it's more detailed, the thing I was saying before about the limit of 20 people. Another way of tokenizing real estate is through debit instrument. So again, we have an SPV. Again, we allocate inside the SPV the real estate assets, but instead of tokenizing the shares of the SPV, we will make the SPV issue some debit instruments that are granted back by the real estate assets and provide, for example, the investors a yield. This is, let's say, an indirect way of achieving the same results. So we will allow investors to invest in tokenized real estate, but they will not directly own the real estate. They will own a debit instrument that is backed and guaranteed by the real estate property and entitles them to receive a yield. But in the end, is a debit instrument, is not a real estate asset. So what they are buying, and of course the private placement memorandum or the offering, the prospectus of the offering will need to be really clear on this point, that we are not offering people the possibility to buy directly the real estate. Then, of course, we encountered the same basically restriction as my colleagues mentioned earlier. So in Switzerland, you know, financial market law is quite harmonized internationally. In Switzerland, we also have these limitations concerning the offering of securities to the public. So either we trigger the applicability of the prospectus requirement, and so for our real estate tokenization operation, we decide to go to the prospectus approval and we obtain the prospectus approval, or we could fall within one of these exceptions. So either we dedicate our offering only to professional clients or to fewer than 500 investors, or even we restrict the offering only to really wealthy investors, meaning that the minimum size of the investment is 100K Swiss francs. Or that's maybe more interesting, the offering is below the threshold, which in Switzerland is a quite interesting threshold because it's 8 million Swiss francs. Then I would like to stress also the fact that in Switzerland, this DLT law introduced also a regulation for DLT market infrastructures. So in Switzerland, you can basically obtain the licenses to operate a proper security token exchange, meaning that you can not only tokenize the real estate asset, but then also create a platform in which people are able to trade these real estate assets. Basically, they amended the various financial regulations concerning market infrastructure to introduce this new market infrastructure that is the DLT trading venue.
1 minute left.
1 minute left, okay. That is the DLT trading venue, and there is even a lighter licensing requirement for smaller DLT trading venues. So they created this regulation in order to allow even new platform or startups that want to take on the challenge to enter into this space to have the possibility with the lighter regulatory requirements to apply for this license. Now, this regulation entered into force on the 1st of August 2021, so it's something really new. We have a live security token exchange here in Switzerland. It's directly owned by the Swiss Stock Exchange. It's called 6 Digital, but they didn't went through this process. They obtained the licenses under the old regulatory regime, let's say. So nobody still obtained a license under the new DLT framework, but I'm sure it's something that will come in the following months. And of course, a person that will do it now will have a significant competitive advantage.
All right.
That's all my side.
Thank you so much. That was very nice and very thorough. Remember, everybody, if you have any questions for Nicola, you can ask them down in the Q&A. And I believe he will also be joining us as a panelist. So yeah, ask your questions down in the Q&A. Nicola will stick around for a while. Thank you very much, Nicola.
Thank you.
All right, and let's see. Now up we have Ali Reza Siadat, partner at Anerton. He will be speaking about German regulations for tokenization. Ali Reza, are you here?
Hi, Mette.
Hello, welcome.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you. So I'm delighted to be able now to speak to you guys. So thank you first for having me on this webinar. It was very insightful to listen to all the other speakers. So I have the great job to present you now what is going on with tokenization of real estate in Germany. And the first thing I have to master is to show you my slides. So therefore, I'm just trying to start it first here on that screen and then go over to that. And then just give me 2 more seconds.
Is this the share screen button at the bottom of the page?
This will work out, no worries.
Fantastic.
So I think this is the right approach. And then you will hopefully see my slide now.
Looks excellent.
Okay, great. So yeah, I will touch on what already Volodymyr discussed or presented in the first presentation, because Germany has fully implemented what we have in the EU or within the European Economic Area. Therefore, I will not repeat what Volodymyr already said, but try to focus on what is special in Germany and try to give to the listeners a good understanding of how to set up your tokenization project in Germany. So as you can see on hopefully the next slide. So as you can see on this slide, we have the regulation of crypto assets and a 10 years overview on this slide. The nice thing about this slide, why I really like this, if you get the slides after the webinar, these are all hyperlinks. So if you click on the title, you will get access to the original document. And you can see here that on the bottom side of this 10 years diagram, you can see the German approach, and on the top side, the global approach on the regulation of crypto assets. So you can see that it all started in the end of 2013, 2014. With the FATF, but also an analogous to that with the German regulator giving its first warnings towards crypto assets. So I do not want to talk too much about this, because I want to go through to the securities regulation. But as you can see here on this nice slide, this is a really the development of the regulation really started very simple with cryptocurrencies, and we now going more into securities. And on the bottom side, you can see that Germany has fully implemented the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, and it has its own law on the so-called electronic securities. I will touch on both topics later on the slides, and you will see on the top slide, on top part, what already Volodymyr touched on is the MiCA, which will most likely jump into law, being effective maybe by the end of this year, we all hope. And then with an 18 months implementation, or not implementation, but with an 18 months grandfathering period, and then fully being applicable by 2024. So you know all this categorization of tokens, which are utility, security, and payment tokens. But what most people do not know is that if you have a payment token, it can never be a security token. So security tokens are negatively defined by saying whatever is a payment token or whatever is a payment instrument can never be a security token. So this really helps us to understand in which regulation you fall in. And we also have the utility tokens, which may or may not be regulated in Germany and within the European Economic Area. So here you see a different category or different table which I want to share with you, because in Germany we do not only regulate securities, like securities as you understand under the MiFID regulation. We also have something which is called investment asset, or under German wording Vermögensanlage, which is very similar to a security, but it's different. So if you look at the category fungibility, this is very interesting, because those of you who are not just into real estate, but also into non-fungible token, you should really listen now, because fungibility actually means under MiFID standards that you have a standardized product, a standardized financial instrument, which is freely tradable on the market. So these are both categories or requirements needed to be a fungible instrument. And when we look at the standardization, this could be technical standardization. So if you look at the Ether standard, so ERC 721 in relation to ERC 20, which is standardized, this is something where you could exclude or eliminate the standardization, but you could also look at two different securities or instruments which are replaceable or which are unique, in other words. So to put it on point, an investment asset under German law is not fungible, but is still regulated as a financial instrument, whilst a security under MiFID regulation must be fungible, otherwise it's not regulated under MiFID security laws. Both of them need a prospectus. You are exempted from this prospectus regulation if you have your issuing a public offering being between 100k euro till 8 million euro for security, and for an investment asset 100k till 6 million. This 100k exemption is just one exemption. We also have other exemptions which Volodymyr already showed you on this first presentation, but this is actually a nutshell example which we can see on exemptions. What is very interesting for those of you who do not only want to target the German market is the passport-able category, which means that if you have a product for which you have a prospectus which is accepted by one regulator within the European Economic Area, you can passport that instrument within the entire European Economic Area. You do not need to take the product and show it to some other regulator within the European Economic Area. You do the so-called passporting once you have the acceptance by one regulator within the European Economic Area. This whole principle of passport or passport-able is also going to be put in the MiCA, but this is not working with the investment asset under German law, because the investment asset is something which you can only distribute and you can only use as in a public offering with the prospectus in Germany. And the same logic applies also to the NFT for those of you who are interested in NFTs. So we heard a lot today about how it is regulated, and many presentations we jumped from funds regulation to banking regulation, but we really have to differentiate between these two categories. And in Germany, which is very interesting, we also have the so-called tied agency model. So the funds regulation, so if I have a fund which is investing in either in real estate and then is tokenizing its fund shares and offering it to the investors, or a fund is investing in tokenized real estate, which does not exist so far. This is funds investment. This is a funds business, but this is not really common because we have a lack of regulation and we have a lack of infrastructure. A lack of infrastructure means we do not really have custodians which would take your tokenized assets under their custody. Therefore, we do not look any further on the left side, but if you look on the bank side and on the tied agency side, you can see that a bank or a security firm in Germany can do almost anything with tokenized assets. This is done normally through brokerage or prop trading business. However, a bank is usually not offering such products because of a lack of technological innovation and a lack of investors who are interested in such tokenized products, because the standard user or standard investor of a bank, of a classic bank, is not someone who's looking into tokenized assets usually. On the other hand, you have crypto enthusiasts who look into tokenized assets, and where you have a fintech or you have a startup which has lots of such investors. However, a bank or security firm—
1 minute left.
Thank you. However, a bank or a security firm is fully regulated in KYC. The tied agent is not. This may be through the umbrella because it is usually using a bank or a security firm as an umbrella institution, and then it's doing the business on an outsourcing agreement. And what both have in common, they both like to work together. So bank or fintech work usually together through the tied agency. I have a couple of more slides which I would like to jump because I only here describe how the German regulation works. I already said it, we have the full implementation of the AMLD5. What we also have in Germany, we have usually crypto assets defined as financial instruments, and therefore they are regulated in Germany, even though they are not financial instruments under MiFID. We have the utility token, which may be excluded as from a financial instrument regulation. We have the so-called crypto custody service provider, which is something we have in Germany and which is coming by MiCA to the whole European Economic Area. And what is very new, we have the so-called crypto register keeper in Germany, which gives you the possibility to put your bearer bonds or your bonds on a blockchain, so without a paper, without a deed, and have fully trust in the register and to do the trading in a very professional manner. And this crypto register keeper is again a regulated institution in Germany. This is in the end, the last slide, just an example how you could set up your business. So you could be, for example, the issue on the right top of this graphic. You could use DigiShares, which may have a platform in Germany and works under an umbrella model with a bank together. And then you have your users or your investors who invest in your products. So you have an SPV who's investing in real estate, which is gathering funds or monies from the investors who issuing some bearer bonds. And these bearer bonds you could put on the blockchain, and you can then choose if you want to have a register. Then you can also do it through register keeper, the investment. But the interesting model here is that you as an issuer, you do not need to have any license, you do not to have any prospectus. If you fall within the exemptions, you work together, let's say with DigiShares, who has an umbrella in Germany, and then you can offer your products fully in a compliant manner to the German market. And this is actually quite easy to set up. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, we can discuss it later on the panel.
Thank you so much, Alireza. That was very good. If you have questions specifically for Alireza, you can also put them down in the Q&A. I'm sure he wouldn't mind typing an answer for you. And I'll see you in the panel very soon. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Ted Lankestry from Gain Companies. He will be our first case study of the day, featuring a Gain coin. So Ted, are you here?
I'm here.
Fantastic. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Please take the stage.
Thank you. Am I there?
You are on.
Okay, thank you. So my background is I've been in the real estate business for over 30 years. I'm actually an attorney here in the United States by licensure, but I've been developing real estate for over 30 years. One of the biggest problems with real estate is liquidity, and but it's also one of the best investments long-term in history. Many parts of the world you can't even own the fee interest or the underlying land interest in real estate, and the United States happens to be a pretty liberal allowance of that ownership unit. So I started thinking recently about how blockchain and what the limitations were of cryptocurrencies could integrate with real estate. And so we came up with this thing called Gain Coin. So let me just show you Gain Coin, and then we'll also go through the share register. Hoping everybody can see that okay. I'm going to close my chat. So what we did, we called it Gain Coin. And the idea was that we would buy or develop ground leased properties in the United States, possibly elsewhere, that were highly, highly secure. So many of you, even throughout the world, will recognize some of these names. Certainly McDonald's and Chase are are well known throughout the world. Thornton's Convenience Stores is actually a division of British Petroleum. So what we thought we would do, and here's the concept, is we saw all these currencies out there, and we said we can allow those currencies to buy our gain coins, where we're issuing 200,000 gain coins. And those gain coins would flow into, that money would flow 100% into ground leased properties. Ground leased properties are very long-term, very safe, and you essentially own the underlying dirt below the building of a very well-known national tenant. And that well-known national tenant will guarantee that 20-year, which is common lease. And so when gain coins fully subscribed for $100 million, you'll essentially have this highly diverse basket of real estate throwing off income in the 4 to 7% range. And in the future, you'll have liquidity. So we like to call this better than Bitcoin. You know, originally in the world, people thought of US currency or other currencies that were very stable as the place to put your capital. And then prior to that, or alongside of that, they thought of gold as an inflation hedge that you could also put your money into very conservatively. Then we moved into the world of Bitcoin and others, cryptocurrencies, and that became a 24/7 liquid instrument, not dependent on any fiat currency. And then there's real estate out there, which is a hedge against inflation. And then what I think of as one of the best real estate in terms of conservatism is ground leases. So we took all three of these concepts and said, let's merge those into one token. And that token's called Gaincoin. So we tend to think it's like a gold standard. It's very, very conservative, 24/7 liquidity, either through the bid-ask system that DigiShares created, or in the future through other exchanges. It's global, it's scarce, and it has a hedge against inflation. And we're going to make it debt-free in the end. So once we're fully subscribed at $100 million, the goal is to not have any debt. So the roadmap for this is we're going to launch Gaincoin. We launched it last week. And we're looking for 2,000 accredited investors because that's what we're limited by US law. We are very close to doing something called Helios Coin and something called Battery Coin. Helios Coin will be a solar investment, and Battery Coin will be an investment in R&D and venture capital in the battery space, which is, of course, a huge growing space. 2023, we're hoping a year from now, we'll be actively trading via the bid-ask system, or possibly a broader offering and or an exchange to increase liquidity. And then 2024, hopefully we'll have a family of tokens that can be offered under our platform. So with the idea of blockchain is transparency and thinness. So we will post right on our live website that you can all go to at gaincoin.io right now, what we're up to. And as we buy things, as we do distributions, as we get more and more creative, there'll be news here under property news. Then the last thing I want to show you quickly is what will happen if you say invest now. You'll go to a screen that looks like, loading here a minute. Let me just stop share and go on to what it will actually look like. So once you log in, you'll be presented with this DigiShares platform that DigiShares white labeled for us. So besides having national credit or global credit, essentially, with underlying our portfolio, we've chosen some best-in-class people. So we have Bull Blockchain doing the law. We have DigiShares doing the platform. We have Sum and Substance doing the KYC AML. We have Verify Investor doing accredited investor verification for the United States investors. And we're using DocuSign for digital signing. So we're trying to be completely digital with best-in-class services. So when you come here, you'll see active properties. We just have Gain Coin up there right now, but soon we'll have Helios Coin and Battery Coin. You can click View Details, and you can see our private placement memorandum and download that and read that completely. And then when you want to invest in it, you can say Invest in Property, and you'll be presented with a screen like this. And this is where it will tell you if you have, like in this example, there's Ethereum in the digital wallet, and you can go to deposit funds. You can select whichever project that you're working on. And in our particular case, right now, we're allowing the Euro, the US currency, Bitcoin, and Ethereum to be essentially different ways to deposit funds into the account. After you do that, you can click Buy, and then send the buy share request here. So you can choose as many shares, oops, I'm going the wrong way, as many shares as you want to buy. And this is in US dollars down here. So that's essentially what we're doing. I know that I was pretty efficient with my time here, but I'll look forward to questions later. And hopefully this gives back some time to the other participants. So thank you.
Fantastic, Ted. Thank you very much. That was very informative and very nice to get a sneak peek behind the scenes at the platform. That was very useful. So thank you so much. All right, so next up we have Rodolfo Monsberger, CEO and founder of Buyman. Rodolfo, are you there?
Yes, hi, Miki.
Fantastic. Oh, I got worried for a minute.
Okay, well,
all right, please take the stage.
Just a second, I will share my screen.
Yes.
So can you see that?
No, I'm not seeing your screen yet.
Just now?
Yes, now you just need to go to present mode because we are seeing
Are you seeing the full screen or just divided?
We're seeing everything, not just the slide.
Okay, well, so just a second, then I will present like this. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation, Klaus and DigiShares. My name is Rodolfo Monsberger. I'm CEO and founder of Buyman Limited. At Buyman, we explore innovative ways and solutions to create trust and transparency in different areas and industries. Today, I'm going to focus on real estate sector, a specific solution we have designed for that. My presentation will focus on a fund scrutiny system, basically, we are developing, and marginally, we will touch on the topic of regulation, how it affects our development. So first of all, I would like to start with the principal agent problem, or the agency theory, better known as agency theory, which represents the central part of the problem we try to solve. And it refers to the situation when the principal entrusts the agent to perform a task, and for this purpose transfer some money to the agent. And as the agent has more information than the principal, she will be eventually using this fund for purposes not agreed upon. This information asymmetry is called moral hazard, and this could happen everywhere in different sectors and industries. Of course, this happens also in the real estate sector. So the question is, how can investors be sure that money is not going to be used in different purposes than has been argued before? So as we see, there are some striking events worldwide. There are a lot of risky events that are not unusual and have a very high impact in ordinary people, in ordinary investors. In Europe, US, China, we have the recent bankruptcy of a Chinese Evergrande real estate developer. And this shockwave has just begun. So these kind of events are happening worldwide. Somehow could be prevented, and I think blockchain is a good tool for that. So how can trust from investors be increased and so business opportunity for builders, developers, or crowdfunding platforms? Considering that trust is earned and not given. Yes. So what way we have to provide confidence and trust to investors? So how much does an investor credibility cost for a public company? So about $750,000 on average, and takes about 18 months. And you have to add $2 million yearly for managing public company expenses, legal fees, and filing, and about 1 million to 1.5 million in C-level salaries. So can it be done cheaper and quicker? Well, I believe that blockchain is an answer for that. DigiShares is doing a lot of cost-effective solutions and fast solutions to achieve that. And but there are still some loose ends, and that is where Bimont could make some contributions. So Bimont focus on solving a problem that cut across different sectors and actors. First, we have the banks that provide money to investors, property owners, who transfer this money to developers so that they can pay different suppliers. This represents an ecosystem with a common interest and also common problems that can benefit from the use of blockchain as a unique distributed ledger. I just want to go into detail with each stakeholder's problem, because I think it is worth to see how all they are connected with a lack of transparency somehow. First of all, we have investors' problems. So investor funds could be misused. Ponzi schemes are not unusual. You have seen the news. Poor accountability and traceability of funds, non-compliance of projects in terms of budget and time schedule, and mortgages are harder to get when working with developers without track record. Banks' problems are the same like investors, so they have the same pain points. And additionally, they miss the opportunity to grow their loan portfolio when they don't find interesting projects. The real estate developer problems are following. So honest developers suffer having bad reputation due to dishonest developers. So we have seen this. And banks are less willing to grant mortgages, and investors prefer not to invest when working with unknown developers. Reporting project progress represents a high administrative burden and requires an independent control from the third party. Finally, lack of credit from suppliers because of payment uncertainty. Many suppliers demand payment on delivery. Finally, problems for real estate developer suppliers and vendors. So they complain about a fair treatment and transparency in bidding process, quotation processes. And of course, suppliers have to deal with difficult bidding processes. So paperwork, neither standardized forms nor standardized processes. So as you see, it's a multi-layered problem, and this could be solved with a unique and distributed digital ledger. Our solution is a funds routing system. You can see there the main stakeholders in the middle, my Bimont solution. DigiShares is part of this solution. Investors and the banks that provide loans, the real estate developers with its respective accounts, and vendors real estate developer vendors and supply with its respective accounts. Well, the idea is to create a whitelist of IBANs with escrow account functionalities. There will be the payments are going to be executed with smart contract based on the accomplishment of specific requirements, like, for instance, the work progress certification or registration of delivery notes when material arrives to the construction field. So this is the broad solution we are trying to provide. For more details, of course, I am available after the presentation or later on. As I mentioned, we are cooperating with DigiShares, and Beaumont funds movement system is going to be offered as an optional model to DigiShares clients. So both systems has been already been integrated, and the idea is to work together in this project and to provide a comprehensive solution that tackle this kind of problem I mentioned before. The value proposition for diverse stakeholders are following. So first of all, accountable funds allocation for investors and banks, reliable certification of the construction progress, transparent quotation and payment certainty for suppliers, and fourth, improved profit risk ratio for investors. On the real estate developer side, we have also value proposition. I believe this is a very strong sales argument. It can be much more convincing when it comes to persuade potential investors to have this kind of tools. Of course, we will have also more and cheaper funding, because the higher trust and confidence from investors is going to provide liquidity, and this also will impact the growth opportunities. This is also in line with the compliance of ESG criteria, environmental, social, and governance criteria, of course, which is a trend today, and this is going to be more and more important in the next years. So the problem we are facing right now, by the way, we are talking about regulatory issues, is that we have
1 minute left.
Okay, thank you. We can face a custodian role. So does this fund routing system have a custodian role? Well, in principle, custodian is a gatekeeper, yes, and that can track funds and assets moving into and out of an account. So basically, we could be facing regulation, but we are trying to find different ways to circumvent this situation. So any advice is welcome, of course, with so many specialists in the panel. Right now, the status quo of the project is the patent has been filed, the first prototype is built. We're carrying out a customer survey, which I invite you to answer. If you want, you can make a print of this slide and go later on to answer this in Google form. A second MVP is going to start in February 22, and we expect to have a customer on board in May or June this year. So thank you, and that's it. And I'm very happy to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo. That was very nice and informative. So I know that there are probably a few questions, but as everybody can see, we are quite a bit over time today. So any questions for Tad and Rodolfo, please ask them down in the Q&A, and they will be able to answer you directly. Because we have run 10 minutes over, and because most of the really good questions that we have gotten have been for the lawyers of today, We are cutting the panel, so it will basically be an all legal panel, which will be very good. So thank you to Tad Rodolfo and our own CEO, Klaus Skåning. If you have any questions for those three, please put them down in the Q&A. Everybody else is invited to come back on stage. Now we're going to go through the panel section. I have a lot of great questions prepared, and hopefully we will get some good discussions between all of the lawyers. So everybody else, please join me on stage again. Are you here?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Very nice, very nice. So this is going to be interesting. Usually when we have a group of lawyers, it can become heated. So I'm asking everybody to please play nice. There are some questions that are for you specifically. I will address them to one of you specifically. We also have a few open questions. So for the open questions, or if you would like to comment on something another person is saying, please just do like this, because I can see all of you all at once. Yeah, of course, try and keep it nice and don't talk over each other, because that can be very, very frustrating and nobody will hear what you say anyway. So with that, let's just jump right into it. The first question is in regards to EU legislation, then we will also expand to hear a US perspective and an Asian perspective after. So first, what are common legal pitfalls within the EU in relation to tokenization? And I think to kick it off, I would like to hear from Alireza, German perspective.
Surprised that I'm the first one. I was thinking I'm going to be the last one. Sorry, I was listening to someone else. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, what are the common pitfalls, legal pitfalls within the EU in relation to tokenization?
Yeah, the common pitfalls are that when we talk about tokenization, the asset itself actually cannot be tokenized. So we normally tokenize rights, and when it comes to non-movable rights like real estate, you not really tokenize the real estate, and we are not there yet. So the law is changing in that respect, and at some point we're going to have the possibility to also really tokenize the asset itself rather than tokenizing the right, and then maybe also going to tokenize real estate. And whilst we have this, we do like a trick by establishing SPVs and entities which hold the assets. And this is why we have different regulation, because this is civil law. This is not regulation, this is civil law. You can look at Liechtenstein, which has the Blockchain Act. You can look in Switzerland, which has also specific law for assets being tokenized and held by the entity. But in most other jurisdictions, we have to do some trick. And this is a pitfall which most do not understand. So regulation itself is EU harmonized, but civil law so far is not harmonized when it comes to crypto assets.
All right, thank you very much. Vladimir, are you here? I cannot see you.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see me now?
Okay, so do you have some comments on common pitfalls within the EU in relation to tokenization?
Sure, I would definitely agree with what Alireza just mentioned. And I would add, for instance, the fact that there's a lack of clarity in relation to DeFi solutions specifically, with regards to EU regulations, and lack of harmonized approach to different types of DeFi applications that could be used in the financial markets. So that's probably also a big pitfall so far.
All right, and same question, but I would like to get a US perspective. So Tyler, common legal pitfalls within the US in relation to tokenization.
Yeah, I think the biggest pitfall can be jumping the gun and maybe not getting a structure and an understanding of the securities laws prior to launching a token. So with that understanding, you can usually navigate the securities laws in the US and globally pretty effectively. But for someone who has already sold a token, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to backtrack on that. You can't really put the cat back in the bag.
Yes.
So setting that foundation is really the most important part. And I guess not so much a pitfall, but one thing that everyone aims to do is to democratize. We hear that buzzword a lot, to democratize investments, which can be really difficult in the US given the regulation. So it's more of a longer process than most people think, because you can really only get to that democratization through the secondary market, because the initial issuance restrictions are so burdensome.
All right, so getting to the giving opportunities to mom and pop investors is almost impossible. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, it's pretty tough, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think we would like to hear from Pooja, also an Asian perspective on some of the most common legal pitfalls. Are you there?
Sure. Yes, hi there. Sorry, it's a bit late here. I think I covered some of it when I spoke. I think where it becomes more tricky is when you're doing a cross-border asset-linked issue. Just all these regulatory and tax issues to work around. And I think from a purely Singapore perspective, I think people just get sort of a bit deterred by the licensing process. It's not that hard, but you do have to just sort of bed down and prepare for the ride.
All right, thank you very much. Jumping on to question number 2. Let's see here. Are real estate tokens used as securities in the jurisdictions you are familiar with, and under the circumstances, would they be viewed as such? So this is real estate tokens specifically. Are they always considered securities? And I think we should hear a Swiss perspective. Nicola, are you there?
Yes, that's really an easy question. Yes. And, if in Switzerland you want to represent real estate assets through a token, as I said, the only way to do it is, again, indirectly, so through an SPV, either through equity instruments or debit instruments, and both of them are financial instruments and securities in particular.
All right, straightforward. And Charles, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Meta. I think we all give the same answer to that. So they're asset backed. It would be, I think, practically impossible to exclude. All right,
so we covered that in the EU, real estate tokens are always security tokens, and there are no way around it. So yes, Pooja, how about in Asia? Can you create a real estate token in Asia that is not a security token?
Yeah, I think it's a very big question. I think in general, it would always be regulated as an investment product.
All right. And finally, in the US, can you create a token that is real estate based, that is not a security token? Tyler?
I have not seen one yet.
Okay, you know what, that was straightforward from everybody in the panel. So anybody wanting to issue a real estate token, it is a security. There's no way around it. Next up, can you comment on the legalities of using NFTs for real estate tokenization? I think we want to hear the US perspective first. So Tyler?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting and kind of bleeding edge question. Using non-fungible tokens to represent real estate assets. I guess the question in my mind is to what end? Because it's still going to be, is that record meant to show that one particular fund or principal owns that entity? And really, what is the purpose? Because it's still going to be considered, the interest in that fund are still going to be considered a security. So I guess without knowing more, I'd just like to dig into that a little bit, because it's something that's being looked at, and I've heard people and clients talk about it, but I wonder what the ultimate goal of kind of adding a property as a non-fungible token would be, just to transfer ownership. We see that a lot in the digital art space with NFTs and digital tokens and art pieces. Trading cards is a big, and play to earn games is a big area as well. So really any asset ownership theoretically could be added as an NFT. It just becomes a question of what is the effect of that, and what is the purpose of transferring it as an NFT.
All right, Thank you very much, and that was very thorough. An EU perspective, maybe Elireza can come in here again. NFTs.
Yeah. So actually, I have a couple of those projects. So we have clients who produce now mint drop NFTs and try to connect it to the real estate. And you could do that. And by doing that, you would not have a security any longer because it is non-fungible. But you would then have fractionalized assets. So you would take, for instance, the property and you would fractionalize the property. You would say, for instance, one floor of a building belongs to the investor A, and the second floor belongs to investor B, and the third floor belongs to investor C. And you, first of all, you would need to put in a register, in a land register, the ownership. So this is off-chain. So this is going to happen in a register. And then you would take an NFT, which is really like, let's say, ERC 721 or 1155. So it is unique and standardized. And this NFT represents exactly the rights of that investor. So the question remains still, what would you have with that? Because it would be not really tradable. Because if you would forward, or if you would transfer that NFT to a buyer on a secondary market, you would need to go back to the register and change the entry in the register. And this is something very important. But you could do that. Theoretically, you could do that. The question remains, commercially or from the business side, what would you gain from that?
Yeah, I guess that is a good question. Yes. All right. So an Asian perspective, Pooja?
Yeah,
NFTs for real estate?
Interesting one, because, you know, Hong Kong and Singapore, as an example, have been slowly and steadily regulating more things in the token economy. But NFTs so far have kind of stayed under the regulatory radar. But I think, again, it's all about the packaging, because, you know, I think in Asia, they're also kind of leaning towards the view that if it sort of looks and smells like a security, then it is. So I think it just kind of, you know, depends how the package works.
All right. Any other people have something to add? No? Okay. Moving on to the next questions. In the EU, US, and Asia, is there any requirement to get a tokenization platform licensed? Under what conditions would it be necessary? So Vladimir, you're up. How do you license a tokenization platform? Is it even necessary?
Well, you could structure it so it would not be necessary. And I think this is more of a question of national law, really, unless with regards to EU law, this would be unless you're undertaking some investment activity that is covered under MiFID, in which case you would have to obtain a license as an investment firm or something similar. But yeah, I would think it would rather be under national law where some additional requirements would be applicable here.
So the answer is that in some countries, yes, you can do it without all of the licenses, and in others, you simply cannot.
Yeah, I think that would be the answer, unless there's another opinion.
All right. Tyler, what about in the US? Can you just launch a tokenization platform, or do you need a special license?
Yeah, so if we're just talking about purely the activity of tokenizing, I mean, there isn't a regulation that applies just to that activity. I think there are regulations that apply when you get into other activities that tokenization platforms might want to offer. So any type of secondary market or transaction-based compensation for the marketplace issuer who would really be earning money from transactions with investors or introducing investors via the platform. That would be a regulated broker-dealer activity that would require a broker license. So you register with the SEC for that. There's also some transfer agent licensing that could be required depending on the types of companies that you might be managing a cap table for. So those are a couple of licenses that could apply depending on some of the other activities that a tokenization platform might undertake. But generally, just the act of tokenizing is not going to be a regulated activity.
Okay. And Pooja, maybe a Hong Kong and a Singapore perspective, can you just launch a tokenization platform? And if not, why? What licenses are required?
Yeah, I think similar answer to Tyler, pretty much yes. But again, you have to just be careful about if you're doing other kinds of regulated activities from a financial services perspective, but just the mere act of tokenizing doesn't bring you within the regulatory net.
All right, so for whoever asked that question, the answer is if you want to do a very simple platform, yes, you can do it in most jurisdictions. If you want to offer more services to your clients, you are going to need some licenses. Anybody has anything to add for that?
Yes, with regard to Switzerland, actually it works quite similarly as in the US, but it's maybe a bit more simple in the sense that, as my colleague said, pure tokenization, so the technological service itself doesn't require a license. But then if you allow people to, for example, buy the assets, you may fall within the scope of anti-money laundering regulation. And so you need to be regulated as a broker. In Switzerland, it's called financial intermediary, but you are not regulated directly by FINMA, but by a SRO, so a self-regulatory organization. So basically you just need an affiliation and you just need to perform KYC checks on your clients. It's not that difficult to obtain this kind of affiliation. It's not even a license, to be honest, just a status.
It's just the status.
Yeah, you need to obtain the status of financial intermediary.
Yeah, nice. Anybody else have something to add? No, jumping on. Well, there are more questions pouring in and we are going a little bit over time, so bear with me, everybody. Next questions. What regions have the easiest regulations currently to get started with real estate tokenization? So you want to buy up some properties and you want to tokenize. Where is the best place to own that real estate? Let's see, Charles, can we hear from you?
Yeah, I think the question is maybe looking at it the wrong way around. So what you're most interested in doing is accessing the funding from investors.
Yes.
That's not a function of where the building is, it's a function of where the investors are.
Very good answer. And can you give some specifics? Where would you think is the best place then from the investor perspective?
So it's that I think it's probably worth saying actually, because maybe all the lawyers have got the same thing in mind. The jurisdiction shopping approach, which is kind of inherent in that question, in my view, and maybe the others see this, kind of misunderstands it and risks the charge of blockchain being a solution looking for a problem. So you shouldn't be looking to tokenize simply because you think that tokenization is a fashionable area and it will be something that you could launch a business in. You've got to have a business model ready and bring tokenization to improve the business model, improve accessibility, efficiency, and things like that. So we get variations on this question a lot, and they tend not to be successful projects. If I can say that, I hope it's not too rude. You've got to start with a good business model, and the regulation that applies is part of the business. It's not a kind of, this isn't something where people should see a kind of regulatory arbitrage opportunity. That's not how the regulators see it, and it's not how the intersection of these rules work. We by and large have pretty similar rules applying and mapping across the different jurisdictions. Sorry.
Yes. No, you know what, that's a very honest question, and I think we've seen the same thing with DigiShares, that the property owners and real estate developers that have done so raised capital many times before. Once they tokenize, they understand that this is just added benefits, and they still have to use all the other skills that they have. So I think it's a very, very honest question. Alireza, when Charles were talking, there were a lot of expressions on your face. Please tell us what you were thinking.
Absolutely agree with Charles. I mean, it was well said, because I always get these questions from clients where they do the so-called regulatory arbitrage, and I'm telling it's not really working. If you choose the blockchain, which is an open infrastructure, and you want to try to distribute your product to the globally, you should not look at where to set up your business. This doesn't really help you. I mean, of course, there are jurisdictions which you try to exclude for specific reasons. Some do it with the US investors, some do it with China or India. You could do this it's like a whitelisting, but you could not really say, I'm setting up my business in Switzerland and then I'm regulated by the Swiss authorities. This is not working. It is active versus passive solicitation, and usually you do not get out of the active solicitation by only putting your web page, let's say, in English language. This is not really working nowadays.
All right, yes. And Tyler, also with you, a lot of facial expressions. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I completely agree with Charles and Elariza. The only thing I would add is, it's hard enough to make sure you have the right tax incentives when you're doing cross-jurisdictional offerings. And so any kind of thread you pull or Jenga piece you could pull could knock over the whole tower. And so I think that's a big consideration as well. I'm not a tax attorney, but in working with tax attorneys who advise our clients, I've learned a lot. I mainly do corporate and securities, but the tax piece is always a crucial element. And to try and forum shop and achieve the greatest possible tax outcome is really not going to be something that's achievable.
All right. Anybody else have something to add to that? More comments? No. Okay. Next question is for Pooja. Let's see. Is there a successful case of real estate tokenization in Singapore? And then I think we would like to hear from the rest of you also on your jurisdictions, but this one was for Pooja specifically.
Yeah, so I think there's no big high profile one. I think there are a few smaller private ones. I think there's been some bigger ones actually in Japan. So it's just been, a bit of there's no sort of real discernible pattern, I think, in sort of where tokenization is headed in the real estate space in Asia.
All right. Nicola, Switzerland, any cases come to mind that were really successful?
So actually in Switzerland is not that popular real estate tokenization for a good reason, that foreign investment into Swiss real estate are limited. So you can invest in Swiss real estate only if you are a Swiss resident or a Swiss citizen. So the model here you could apply if in the SPV you allocate foreign real estate assets. It would work perfectly if you need to tokenize, for example, European real estate through a Swiss SPV. And probably this is the reason why in Switzerland there is now really a trend to do this kind of real estate tokenization. And even more, the framework I was describing is really recent. As I told you, the law came into force only on the 1st of August last year. So it's not a lot of months that this framework is available for a person that wants to launch such a business initiative.
All right. And Charles, can you think of any cases?
Yeah, I'm here for tokenization in the UK, you mean?
Yeah, specifically, yeah. So some really successful real asset tokenization projects.
Yeah, so we've done tokenization across a number of asset classes. Real estate is certainly not scaled in the UK. There have been 1 or 2 prototype transactions and more going on at the moment. The market is waiting for one of the big retail fund names to launch something, and that is something that they're all more or less considering, but we haven't had an announcement yet. But across other asset classes, a lot of the alternative asset classes have been tokenized, and so in the UK, the market and things that we've worked on, that includes wine and whiskey, art, gems, different types of debt, invoice discounting debt. So we've got not deep markets, but relatively broad markets, although still many of the transactions are at a kind of prototype stage. So we test the documents and we test the technology without getting too stuck in the points that Tyler and the others are speaking around complexity of cross-border analysis, the securities securities compliance. So not doing prospectus, but relying on an exemption by choosing a small group of connected high net worth investors. So we're making steps, I think, across different markets and all jurisdictions. If we look back in 5 years, I'm confident it will look very different. I can't tell you exactly how we get from here to there, though.
No, it is. I think for some of us who has been working in this industry for a long time, we know that things take time, and even though all of the technology is amazing, adoption can feel very slow sometimes.
Yeah. I think there's a famous, is it one of the Californian technology, maybe Tyler would recognize this for us, the statements about technology innovation happens very slowly and then very quickly.
Yeah, true. Yes, yes. Alireza, a German perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I do not want to use too much of our time. I think we have one or more questions left. I would agree with Charles on many points. Yes, just to add on that, if you look at the German market, we have lots of startups, lots of companies, and also established companies which are into the real estate tokenization right now. We have the Deutsche Börse, which has put up a new startup at 360X, which is going to offer fractions in real estate and also in art and tokenizing that. So there's a lot going on in Germany. And I just invite the listeners and those who are now here to just make the Google research and check out the German market. There's lots of going on with tokenization. Okay, you said the Deutsche Börse. So that is the German stock exchange. Yeah. Yes. All right. So everybody can check that out if you're interested. That sounds like it's about to bring tokenized projects to the masses. So that sounds really interesting. Tyler, a US perspective to finish off here?
I think the most universally referenced case study is the Aspen Resort, the St. Regis Resort in Aspen in Colorado. That was one of the first tokenized real estate offerings. It was about 18 million that they tokenized for a REIT. And so that's been a huge case study, and there hasn't been a lot of follow through, as everyone else has mentioned. I think it's lagged beyond the point of what most expected. But to Charles's point, innovation usually accelerates after a few years after people start to catch on. And so I think, we've been working on tokenized offerings that are coming to the secondary market. You have lockup periods that are still expiring before tokenized investments can go on secondary markets. So we think it's coming, but it's just taking a little bit more time than expected.
Yes. Okay, we have one final question, and this is just asked as an open question. So anybody want to answer, raise your hand. So how much value has been tokenized in the primary markets, and how much of this is expected to begin trading in the secondary markets in 2022? So somebody?
I think we all have homework to do if we want to answer that.
That was a very, very specific question. Yeah, so to whoever asked that question, I'm sorry, but nobody has sat down and done all of that math. But it would be interesting to know, so maybe somebody will be inspired, do the math, and write us an article about it. I would like to hear about it too.
I think we could say, Meta, that sort of looking at the different platforms and adding up the deals that have been across DigiShares and your colleagues and competitors in the market, I think we could add up certainly in the single figure billions and potentially into the between 10 and 20 billion. And I'm probably just thinking of Europe. So then that's a higher figure, including US and Asia markets. So it's not, I think it's important that although we're saying we haven't quite scaled and there are challenges in industries, we're not talking about something where these are very low figures. There is business in the sector.
All right, I think that was a very nice estimate. And once again, anybody feel inspired to do all the math in total and write an article, please send it to me. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us, and thank you for staying patient with us, even though we went 15 minutes over time. You were all so great. And the audience, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all of your wonderful questions. You truly made this webinar great today. So thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.